The murder of Elizabeth McCabe was the infamous murder of a 20-year-old woman in Dundee, Scotland in February of 1980. This case is one of Scotland's most notorious unsolved murders and led to one of Scotland's largest manhunts. McCabe, a nursery nurse with a kind heart and a newfound passion for socialising and disco dancing, had disappeared after a night out at Teaser's Disco in Dundee city centre and was found strangled to death 2 weeks later in Templeton Woods on the outskirts of the city. This was only 11 months after another woman, 18-year-old Carol Lannan, had been found dead only 150 yards away in the same woods, leading to the killings being labelled as the Templeton Woods murders in the press and causing many to fear that there was a serial killer at large in the city at the time, although police have not linked the murders to this day. The case was reopened with advances in DNA profiling in 2004 and was briefly one of the 7 cases officially linked to the serial killer Angus Sinclair as part of an inquiry named Operation Trinity before Sinclair was conclusively eliminated from the cases. However, a taxi driver and criminal who had been a suspect in the original McCabe inquiry and who admitted to being a peeping Tom in Templeton Woods was tried for the murder in 2007 after it heard that DNA was found on exhibits that only had a 1 in 40 million chance of belonging to anyone else. He also admitted being in the woods that night. However, he was found guilty by a majority decision at the conclusion of the trial. Afterwards, police said they were not looking for anyone else in connection with the murder, although the case remains a historic old case. Elizabeth McCabe was a 20-year-old trainee nursery nurse who was described as quiet and shy. She rarely drank or went on nights out until about 3 or 4 months before her murder, where she had begun to embrace socialising and disco dancing. On Sunday the 10th of February 1980, she left her home in Lyndhurst Avenue, Lochee, for a night out with friends. They went to several pubs but eventually ended up at Teaser's Disco in Union Street, Dundee. Her friend, Sandra Neven, said McCabe had been crying in the disco toilet that night because she thought no one liked her. Neven said that at the end of the night, at around 12:30 a.m, the pair became separated as they were leaving, and she expected to find McCabe at the entrance of the nightclub waiting for her so they could leave together, but she was not. Neven looked for her and checked a nearby taxi rank but couldn't find her friend and assumed that she had made her own way home. Her mother later said that she normally would have taken a bus or taxi home after a night out, more than likely a taxi given the time of the night. 3 months prior to this, McCabe had got into a car that she had mistaken for a taxi after a night out. She had been mistaken for a prostitute by a man who had approached her for services shortly before she disappeared, something which she had joked about with Neven the very weekend she vanished from the nightclub. McCabe failed to return home that night and her parents were immediately concerned since it was out of character for her and she had work the next day. 24 hours later, her mother reported her missing, as completely out of character for the quiet and shy Elizabeth, in the mistaken belief that she had to wait this amount of time before she could do so. It was believed that McCabe had attempted to get home by taking a taxi, since at that time of night she would have not been able to get home in Lochee by any other means. 16 days after she disappeared, on that ill-fated night, McCabe's naked dead body, wrapped in a blue jumper, was found in a small clearing in Templeton Woods on the outskirts of the city by 2 men hunting rabbits with their dogs. She was found under a pile of branches with a light covering of mud which had been placed on top of her in an attempt to conceal the body. A post-mortem revealed that McCabe had died from asphyxia caused by compression of her neck. A professor who was asked to review the evidence again when the case was reopened in 2005 concluded that her death would have been quite the sudden due to vagal inhibition in her neck and that she had possibly been killed during a struggle or during a sexual act. During the time McCabe disappeared and late February, items of McCabe's clothing were found at Cooper Angus Road in the city near the Kingsway. 2 months after the murder, on the 2nd of April 1980, McCabe's jewellery and a photo belonging to her were also found in Cobden Street. Some weeks later, her shoes were also found abandoned in this location. 2 witnesses reported seeing a Ford Cortina with a taxi sign on it emerge from a road which led to Templeton Woods on the night McCabe disappeared. They reported that the driver appeared to be alone in the car with the interior lights on and that he appeared to be driving with his wrists as if he had dirty hands and didn't want to touch the steering wheel. The 2 witnesses reported that this was the taxi of Vincent Simpson, who ran a local taxi company in Newtown near Dundee. He drove a Ford Cortina taxi at the time. As a result, Simpson was questioned by the police and admitted being in the woods on the night McCabe disappeared, claiming he had taken his dog for a walk there at about 10 p.m. and saying that he had returned to the woods after midnight on his way to collect a fare in Dundee. He claimed in a statement that he had gone back to try and steal from a car he had seen in the woods before. Simpson had a criminal record dating back to when he was a child and was a heavy gambling addict. When shown a picture of McCabe, he claimed he did not recognise her. He protested that he did not have any convictions for violence or sexual crimes, but in an interview on the 3rd of March 1980, he admitted to being a peeping Tom who used binoculars to spy on courting couples in Templeton Woods. He also reportedly admitted to other unpleasant and embarrassing things in interviews. Despite a large and widely publicised manhunt for the killer, police failed to charge anyone with the murder of McCabe, and late into 1980 the investigation was wound down but left open. Only 11 months prior to the discovery of McCabe's body in Templeton Woods, another woman had been found dead only 150 yards away in the same forest. 18-year-old Dundee prostitute Carol Lannan was found in Templeton Woods in March of 1979 after last been seen getting into what was believed to be a Ford Cortina estate car taxi in Exchange Street, the city's red light district, at 8 p.m. on the 20th of March 1979. She had earlier been picked up from her home in Hill Street and taken by taxi to the centre of the city by Commercial Street, but this taxi driver was never traced. Just like McCabe, she was strangled to death and found naked, and taxi drivers were also the key to the focus on the Lanham murder inquiry. Both had also last been seen in the city centre. The murder led to fears that there was a serial killer at large in the city at the time, and the two cases became known as the Templeton Woods murders. However, investigators at the time were said to be keeping an open mind on whether the same person killed both women. 11 days after Lanham was found dead, her handbag was mysteriously found at a remote location on the banks of the River Don in Aberdeenshire, 85 miles away from Dundee. Police therefore believed that the killer had a connection with this area. In 2004, police linked the murders of Lanham and McCabe together with 5 other murders across Scotland as part of Operation Trinity, although police subsequently announced that the Templeton Woods murders were not linked to the other 5 cases, and said in 2005 that there was no evidence to link the murders of Lanham and McCabe at that stage. In 1996, Tayside Police ordered a new review to take place of the murders of Elizabeth McCabe and Carol Lanham following the reopening of another case in the Glasgow area. In 2004, detectives from 3 police forces in Scotland announced that there were strong links between the then unsolved murders of 7 young women, including those murders of McCabe and Lanham, and other similar murders at the time. These murders were investigated under Operation Trinity, and serial killer Angus Sinclair was identified as the prime suspect in all of the murders. Sinclair was subsequently convicted of the other murders on DNA evidence and remains the prime suspect in the 3 other murders in Glasgow during 1977. However, it was discovered that Sinclair definitely could not have been committing the murders of Lanham and McCabe, since prison records show that he was in prison when both of these murders occurred. Investigators subsequently ruled out a link between the Templeton Woods murders and the 5 other cases, and although ruled out a link between the murders of Lanham and McCabe themselves. The reinvestigations of 2004 led the McCabe case being reopened, and with advancements in DNA profiling, which had not been discovered at the time of the murder in 1980, items in the McCabe murder case were sent for DNA analysis in 2004. New public appeals were also made, which led to 2 notable calls from the public regarding the concerning behaviour of an unknown taxi driver who operated in the area at the time in 1980. In 2005, police arrested Vincent Simpson, the taxi driver who had been a suspect in the original investigation at his home in Camberley, Surrey. He was charged formally with the murder in 2005 and sent for trial in 2007. It emerged in the trial that the police had bugged the car for the 8-hour journey in the hope that they could lure Simpson into a confession. When the police detective was cross-examined and the lawyer asked about whether recording equipment had been placed in the police car, he said at no time in that 8-hour journey did he say anything incriminating that compromised his position of complete and utter innocence. The officer replied with, "Yes, that is correct." However, the bugging of the police car did raise doubts with the jury about the validity of the other evidence. Simpson's trial began in October 2007 in Edinburgh, 27 years after the murder had taken place. Simpson did have several previous convictions, mostly for dishonesty and petty crime, having been convicted of larceny in 1967, going equipped to steal in 1970, theft in 1974, burglary and theft in 1977, and fraud and making false statements to the police in 1981. However, the jury were not made aware of these previous convictions, as Scottish law prevents the previous convictions being heard in court. The defence had attempted to get the case against Simpson thrown out at the early stages, but were unsuccessful. They had claimed that he could not receive a fair trial due to the fact that some of the witnesses from the time had either died, could not be traced, and because some documents and items were now missing, whilst also saying that prosecuting would breach his human rights. The judge rejected these claims, saying that while the passage of time since the murder had caused some disadvantage, he was not convinced that any trial would not be fair. Simpson also faced 2 other charges of breach of the peace on the grounds that he had approached women in Dundee at the same time as the murders and caused them distress and alarm. At the trial, it was heard that DNA found on the jumper draped over McCabe, where she was dumped, very likely came from Simpson. Swabs taken from 3 different parts of the jumper all matched DNA profile of Simpson. The chances of the DNA found on the right-hand side of the jumper's neck coming from someone other than Simpson were estimated to be 1 in 320,000. The chances of the DNA from the back of the jumper coming from anyone other than Simpson were 1 in 105,000. A hair found on the back of the plastic sheeting used to transfer McCabe's body to the mortuary in 1980 was also found to match Simpson's DNA, with the test indicating the chances of it not belonging to him were 1 in 1,300. Together, the combined odds of the DNA coming from someone unrelated to Simpson were 1 in 40 million, and Jonathan Whitaker, who conducted the DNA tests, testified under oath. In my opinion, these DNA profile results provide extremely strong support for the assertion that the DNA recovered from the hair and blue jumper has originated from Vincent Simpson. On the DNA from the jumper's neck, Whitaker said, "This result is of particular significance since the DNA profile is what I would expect to find if Vincent Simpson had grabbed the jumper in the area of the neck, thus transferring his DNA to this area." There had also been a litany of several items of events that the police had mishandled, including samples taken from the deceased, her tights and pants, which might be deemed significant items. Incredibly, a bank bag thought to contain forensic evidence was found in a box relating to the murder of Carol Carol Lannon. All of these led to the plausibility of contaminated and missing evidence that could simply not be admissible in a trial. Simpson, who was described as always smartly dressed and well-groomed, refused to give evidence at the trial. However, his defence argued that the DNA evidence must have become contaminated. The defence alleged that the fact that the hair found that matched Simpson's DNA had not been found in an earlier examination of the sheet in 2003 was significant. The defence claimed that the DNA was also tainted because there were, at that time, only around 3 labs in the world that were advanced enough to carry out the techniques used to analyse the evidence, meaning it was difficult to check the results. The defence asserted that the police had wrongly focused and profiled taxi drivers, claiming that they had done so because they feared that McCabe's killer had also killed Carol Lannon, and that the police wrongfully feared a serial killer was on the loose. Police had never actually linked the murders and had previously said there was no apparent connection. Detectives denied at the trial that they ignored other possible subjects and plausible theories, saying that the investigation was led by the evidence, and there comes a time when the evidence points to an individual, not police bias. Simpson himself claimed to have an alibi, saying he was either at home ferrying fares around the Dundee area or at a local casino when the murders took place. However, police revealed that they had questioned the casino doorman at the time, and the man told them that he hadn't remembered seeing Simpson that night, and that the casino doorman also testified at trial that Simpson had in fact phoned to pressurise him into claiming the police that he had been there at 1 a.m. that night. The doorman responded to Simpson by saying that he could not do so and did not know him and could not remember ever seeing him. At trial, the detectives on the case denied there had been contamination, with retired Detective Inspector Ian Kennedy saying that police took every step to ensure this didn't happen. On a video shown to the jury of detectives examining the evidence, Kennedy said, "My recollection of that exercise was that we took every possible step to make sure that there was no chance of contamination." He added that the contamination was also not necessarily a problem if the source of the contamination was known. The jury was shown a video of Simpson in a police interview after he was arrested, in which he said that the DNA evidence was tainted, but replied when he was asked if he was accusing the police of planting evidence, the answer was, "It doesn't happen, does it?" At the end of the trial, the judge told the jury that they must not convict Simpson on the basis of DNA evidence alone. Subsequently, the jury found 61-year-old Simpson not guilty by a majority verdict in December of 2007. After a trial that had taken 7 weeks, once the not guilty verdict had been read, Simpson was discharged from the dock a free man and gave a solemn "thank you very much" before leaving the court. McCabe's mother and other family members had attended the trial almost every day and were reported to have been distressed by the verdict. With Ali Reid of Tayside Police commenting, "Elizabeth's family are understandably disappointed at today's verdict. They understand and support the reasons behind the reinvestigation of Elizabeth's death and appreciate the efforts of those involved in bringing the matter to court." Detective Chief Inspector Ewan West said that he was disappointed for the McCabe family at the verdict. Unfortunately for Elizabeth's family, the truth of what happened to their daughter may never be known. In 2020, a senior investigator on the McCabe case said the murders of McCabe and Lannon could still be solved, although police said that there was no plan to reinvestigate and reopen the cold cases. In conclusion, now retired Detective Chief Superintendent Jim Cameron said, "I have an open mind about who killed Carol and Elizabeth. We interviewed thousands of people and could have very well interviewed the killer. I honestly don't know. He simply slipped the net."